We all went to the grocery store for the first time after COVID kind of shut things down, and what was the first thing off the shelves? All the bread. And so then everyone was like, well, it's time to start making bread. And I don't know about you, but I haven't touched that wheat that my mom gave me 20 years ago. That I was like, well, I don't know if I want to touch that wheat. And so luckily, we had lots of flour here and yeast, and it was just so fun to be able to like jump into the world of making bread. But then my eyes were opened this year as I decided to take my own journey. Why am I getting emotional? With sourdough, and it was something that I was not expecting, and it was something that I was kind of like, everyone else has done this. I hate to jump on this like bandwagon of sourdough, but it was really, really good for me mentally. I think it caused me to just slow down every morning, and it gave me something to just focus on and to be able to help nurture. I wanted to take a starter from the very, very beginnings, and so I grew 3 starters all at once. I don't recommend that. My kids are like, Mom, you talk to your starters more than you talk to us. But it became kind of like a spiritual journey for me, that it was grounding. It gave me a few minutes every morning to just kind of focus on those fun things. And then what came out of it was something that I would have never expected. I had this little starter that was reminding me every day of ways that I could reach out and connect with people. And I think that's why it's so emotional, is because who doesn't love a knock on your door with a fresh loaf of bread and someone is saying, hey, I made this bread and I was thinking of you. And I think I know that I can thank Charity for that, because she has inspired me for many years as a teacher here. And she's like, oh, I just whip up these loaves of bread and I keep them here and I take them to this. And for a long time, I was like, she would give me her starters and I'm like, sorry, Charity, I killed it. And she's like, Heather, you're not killing it. You're just neglecting it. And who doesn't feel like that in life sometimes, where there's just certain things in our lives that we've neglected, and then we just have someone reminding us that, like, okay, these are the things that are important, or this is what we can focus on. And just by small, simple daily tweaks, then we get those blessings that come from that. And so Charity always makes me cry when she comes here. I don't think it wasn't a coincidence that our lives aligned one day, and she has just been a forever friend and just a mentor in my life. I hired her to be my life coach, like, and she's just her name is Charity, is perfectly fits her. She just brings joy and light, and she's always serving everyone. And so it's fun that you guys have this opportunity to come learn from her today. She studied bacteria, which who would have thought that is where we got here, but that's completely what sourdough is, and we don't need to be afraid of it. And I hope she'll tell you a little about her journey, because her journey helps us all stay connected. But when I decided to embark on sourdough, she was my right-hand gal. I would text, is this okay? What's going on? How do I do this? And I don't know if you guys have tried sourdough, but you can buy a book and it can go really in depth, or you can try Charity's approach. And as a busy mom, it made it doable for me. I didn't have to prepare this 7 days in advance and tell my kids, don't touch that. We're not having bread yet. But she gave us the busy mom's way of sourdough. And we put together this guide with Charity's help that I keep on my table all the time as I'm making bread. And it's been so fun to have this little part. If you subscribe to our At the Table magazine or have this was in issue 5, but we just took the sourdough portion because this is our heart and soul, and this is what we put into this. And so you guys are like one of the first to know that we actually have a little mini guide. But this has Charity. This is Charity all over it, giving us the ways to do this. And so when she said we can do chocolate sourdough, I was like, absolutely. But there'll be a little mix of love and all the great things in life with some chocolate sourdough today. So what's your Instagram?
Charity Lighten.
Okay, used to be a Vibrant Life, and that's what I always keep.
Yeah, I know.
So her Instagram is Charity Lighten, and she's always just inspiring me every single day to just do the little things that matter. And so follow along with her there, but we're just happy to have her here in the kitchen with us. If you guys didn't fill out the slip or need one, come fill one out. We're going to give away some stuff in this class too, so we'll grab that at the end of class. But
okay,
I'm so excited you're here.
Okay, thank you. I can't live up to anything she just said, so we're just gonna get right to the bread. This normally, you guys, I could talk to you honestly. If she said, could you fill 4 hours? We would talk for 4 hours about all the things about bread and things I've learned. We do not have 4 hours. So we're gonna do a little bit of backwards work because I want to show you the last step first. I do want to get a loaf of bread in the oven so you guys can see it. So here's what I want you guys to think about, okay? Making sourdough just has a few stages, okay? Stage 1 is making the dough. Stage 2 is letting it rise, which we're gonna do that. Stage 3 is shaping the dough. Stage 4 is letting it rise one more time, just a little bit shorter. And step 5 is baking the dough, okay? So, yes, question already, I love it.
Stage 1, like planning your starter when it's gonna be doubled, like.
We will get to that at the end because I'm gonna have to feed it. So I'll show you guys how to do that. So right now, this loaf is ready to go into the oven. This is the last step. So the last thing I do right before I go in the oven is I'm just gonna put some flour on top of the bread. And the reason I just flour the dough, it purely is just aesthetically. I'm gonna cut the dough. The proper term is score. I'm gonna score the bread. And the reason I score the bread is because steam's gotta come out of this bread somewhere. If you don't score the bread, that's fine, but it will find its own way out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna score the bread right here like this with our special little tool here. And I'm gonna get this in the oven. And so the flour that I just sprinkled on top just kind of accentuates the design. So it's as simple as that. This is gonna go into the oven for 45 minutes. Yes?
Okay, so my question is about the lane.
Yes, that's this tool right here.
Does that mean, like, okay, so you make it look like, here we go, we're drawing on the bread. But
Yes.
when I do it, it's like sticking and I'm pulling it. Sometimes the bread will get crust on it and then it's easier. Is there a way to develop the crust, or is that not a good way to do it?
So people that might be struggling with scoring the dough, here's a little secret. A cold dough is much easier to score. So people in the beginning, if you're like, I'm really struggling with that, what I recommend is put your dough in the refrigerator for the second rise. Then you get it, it's much firmer, and then the other thing I would just say, you can practice, and you can practice on Play-Doh, which sounds super, super weird, or like just go in and be committed. The worst thing that you can do is go really, really slowly, because then the blade starts to pull what's called the gluten skin. Now in the end, what's the purpose of the scoring? It's really just aesthetics. So it doesn't change anything with the flavor or the crumb of the bread, so you don't need to worry about that. But so when you go in there, just be committed. Like just go in for it. You even start with just one cut if you want to until you get used to doing that. Yes?
Do you not use a hot pan?
Oh my gosh, you guys have the best questions and we barely started. That's a great question. Okay, I'm gonna answer that in a different way, but in case I don't answer it, be like, did you forget my question? Okay, so here's what I'm gonna tell you guys in this class. I have baked probably, I was trying to calculate, over 1,000 loaves of bread, but I am not a sourdough guru. I am like the lazy version, consider me Dummies 101 sourdough. What I did is I was like, okay, I know that there's these amazing bakers and they have all these different hydration levels of their sourdough. Like, what's the easiest, fastest way that I can make sourdough bread? That was my goal when I first started. I was doing my thesis in bacteria and probiotics, and so I was fascinated by this idea that you can take flour and water and bacteria from the air and make bread. So when I started delving into it, it was a process. Now this I will tell you, you can Google sourdough recipe. You guys, there is a whole world. Like, it's like this vortex of like this black hole that you can go into and look at this whole world of sourdough bread. And with all these different variations and all these different recipes, my goal was like, I wanted to taste good and I needed it done in a day. That was my goal. And with that, because we don't have a lot of time to go into my personal story, I was working on a thesis at the same time that my husband was going through cancer treatments. And it was traumatic for me. Like, I didn't get along with this doctor, so chemo days were really hard for me. So my mother-in-law wanted to go. She's like, oh, can I take him to chemo? I'm like, yes, please. But I wanted to do something for him. Every time he came home from chemo, I wanted to have a fresh loaf of sourdough bread. So for me, it was really necessary that I could do this in like one day. So what I started doing was I was like, okay, well, most sourdough recipes call for a small amount of starter. And starter, for those who are like brand new, Starter is just a mixture of flour and water that has captured bacteria. This is a colony of bacteria. That's all this really is. So they started with a small amount of sourdough starter, and then they fermented. The bread fermented over time, like sometimes on the refrigerator, sometimes on the counter, sometimes you had to give it a lullaby, but like it was this whole process. And I was like, okay, I just want to tweak this. So I'm like, well, if there's no yeast in the bread, and the starter is what makes the bread rise, couldn't I just add a little bit more starter to work this time down on a clock? And rather than doing this, could I do this? And rather than using distilled water or like special water, could I just try tap water? And rather than heating my Dutch oven in the oven super, super hot and then burning my hands when I put in, what if I didn't? What if I just heated my oven really hot and then put the Dutch oven in? So it was all these little steps until finally I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, it can be easy. Like that's what I used to tell Heather, like it can be easy. It does not need to be hard. So people would come in and they're like, okay, now can your starter touch the stainless steel? Yes. Wait, can you use tap water? Yes. Wait, can you use a Dutch oven that's not been heated? I'm like, yes, it does not need to be that hard. So if anything, I'm like, just experiment. Give yourself permission to go in your kitchen, and there's just something, I don't even know what it is, but part of me feels like there's this connection, like we have this world right now that is so busy and so hyperactive that in some ways I felt like COVID forced all of us to just kind of go back inside, go back to our roots. Like still to this day when I'm touching dough, like I know this sounds so crazy, but I'm like, there's just something, I don't know, like slowing, like Heather was saying, it almost caused her to slow down a little bit, to reconnect with the roots. And for me, I find bread to be a pretty spiritual thing in the sense that when my husband was really sick and he passed away, and so still bread is one of those things where I don't feel him very often, but I swear when I come to Geeky's and I do bread, it's something that reminds me of him. And I was making so much bread, it was truly therapeutic. Like I was going through this bread thing where I had so much bread coming out of my home. But what I found is I was trying not to drown in my own fear and my own struggles. And so I would take bread every day. I'd wake up and I'm like, okay, God, who needs bread today? And what I found was I was not the only one struggling. I wasn't even close to the only one struggling. Like every single person had something hard that they were going through. And my guess is if I asked you all, and I'm going to raise your hand if you've been through something hard this year. If you've experienced something hard this year. Like most of the time there's just hard. And as humans, we want to do something. We're still good. We want to do something. We want to say something, but often we don't know what. Am I right? Where we're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so, this is how, I don't know what to do. There was something about bread. Every time, you guys, every time I could say, I don't have words, but they could feel this connection through this loaf of bread, through this bread of life that I was like, it's just sharing love. So I love teaching people how to make bread. The irony is I have my master's in nutrition science. This is not a health food by any means. That's not lost on me. But what I learned is there's a place for health and nutrition, and there is a place for love and connection. And they're not mutually exclusive. They don't need to be. So I love teaching bread because what our world needs more of right now is not necessarily carbs, but we need more connection. We need more people going, I might be feeling a little lost in my own world, but I can put that aside to connect with people in this form of bread. It's the silliest little thing. They're like, we just signed up for bread. We did not sign up for any of this stuff.
I should have told you this will be like the emotional drive.
So I want you guys to master sourdough. And so I hope that answered your question. There's all these different ways of doing it. Find the way that works for you. I'm just offering you what I think is the easiest way. Now people will come up and they're like, well, your bread's not as sour, it doesn't have nice bubbles. I'm like, I know, mine is a cheap version of sourdough bread, but it works. So all I want to get through with this class with you guys is I want to just go through at least the 4 stages of bread so that you can kind of see how this works. So if you guys have more questions or you're like, oh my gosh, I want my own starter, I want to do this by myself, come to the other classes. We've got hands-on classes, we've got some demo classes, and it's just a love fest with carbs at the end. Like, what more could you want? So we're going to start. This is my starter. I started this from scratch. It's just flour and water. So for those of you that are like, oh my gosh, I really want to start this from scratch, the sourdough booklet, does that have okay. So that's in the booklet, it's on their website, it's on my website, there's not a lack of resources. So we've got starter right here. Now, because I'm a creature of habit, I hope you guys don't mind, I'm gonna double the recipe. This is just, actually no I'm not. That will throw you guys off. I'm not. At home I double the recipe all the time. Here's why, I'll tell you why. My first degree is accounting. That's my brain. My brain is an accountant at heart. Do you want me to tell you the most expensive part of making your sourdough bread? Yeah, well, if you made a lot of money, that would be true. It's turning on your oven. It's having your oven on for an hour. So when I was doing that, I was like, okay, well then, why wouldn't I just put 2 loaves in my oven? So I always do two loaves of bread. For those of you that right now, you're like, I know I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna double this recipe, just write somewhere on your piece of paper, 900 grams. That's how much one loaf, one recipe makes. So if you double it, just know 900 grams would go out into a separate bowl, okay? You don't even need to get into that. Just write it down because someday you'll be like, I wonder how much in it. 900 grams. So your recipe, yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, please. I could, like I said, I could just talk and talk and talk this whole
Okay,
time.
so I love that you say to double it because I actually triple it. And
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Nice.
But with the starter, I don't know if you're going to go over this now or at the end.
Okay.
But how do you plan for how much you need? 'Cause
Okay.
sometimes I'll be measuring my starter and I'm like, oh crap.
You run
I have
out.
like 2 tablespoons left. Uh-oh.
Okay. I will go over feeding starter, how much starter, taking care of the starter at the end of class. Your job is to make sure I don't forget that. Does that work? Okay. So I'm just going to follow this recipe. How much starter do I need, you guys? Look at your recipe. 150 grams. Now I've had people in class say, oh, could you please convert that to cups for me? And I say, no, I am so sorry, I refuse to do that. Here's why. It is one of those things, there's very few, the accountant in me does not want to tell you to go out and buy things. But a scale will be your best friend. It's the only thing I use my scale for. I use it religiously, but I also don't have a lot of dishes. Everything just goes right into my bowl. I don't even, truth be told, this is my bowl, you guys. I don't even wash my bowl. I know, we're like gas, because I make a lot of bread. If I'm gonna go a week without making bread, fine. But otherwise, what's in my bowl? Starter, that's it. So I really have very few dishes other than my very favorite, this is my favorite kitchen tool of all time, which I got here. So I have 150 grams of starter. Now I get a lot of questions, okay, does the water matter? What you guys heard my quick version. Does the water matter?
No.
No. Does the salt matter?
Yes.
Yes, I'm a big fan of a good salt. Redmond salt is my favorite salt. I am a big believer in a good salt. So, how much salt do I need, you guys?
300. No, sorry, 10.
10 grams. Okay, we got 10 grams of salt right there on the nose. So I'm setting my scale back to 0 every time. And again, because this is a demo class, I'm just trying to show you guys as much as we possibly can in a short period of time. So the next thing is water. How much water do I need? 300. So my scale's set back to 0. Now, when we do the hands-on class, almost every time there's somebody that goes over and puts too much water in. Don't worry about it. Just grab a spoon and take some of the water out. So that's why I like to put the water in before the flour, because then if we need to, we can take a little bit of the water out. Really quickly, the temperature of the water. We go into this in detail in class. Temperature of the water is normally just room temperature. If I want my rise to go quicker, I'm going to use warm water. If I want my rise to go slower, I'm going to use ice cold water. You're like, why would you ever want your rise to go slower? When I want to make bread right before I go to bed, and I don't want to get up at 5 in the morning, I'll use ice cold water because I want it to slow down so I could get 8 hours of sleep. Does that make sense? So warm water, cold water, yeah.
Sorry, were you finished?
Yes.
Okay, so my other question is, do you get more of a ferment taste if it is a slower rise?
To be honest, I can't really tell a difference with the ferment unless I really prolong it with refrigeration. So people that are like, hey, I really want a really sour bread, my recipe is for the quick and easy and the lazy. If you're like, I want the sour one, it's a slightly different process that it just requires a longer ferment. And when I say ferment, here's all we mean by that, is that there's bacteria. Like this is living, amazing food science. That bacteria is going in there, it's eating the gluten, it's producing essentially carbon dioxide, like bubbles in your bread. It's what's making your bread rise. That's it. That's the nature, that's the science. So people that have gluten intolerance, the reason that they can handle sourdough bread or doesn't bother their stomach, one is I'm a big believer things that you make in your own home. are a bit healthier than things that you purchase in the store, but that gluten is being pre-digested by that bacteria, so that makes it a little bit easier on digestion. So the next step, we've got water, we've got starter, we've got salt. That's it. The last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add half bread flour, half all-purpose flour. That's just what I have just found. It's just the perfect mix of that fluffiness and flavor for my bread. So I need 450 grams of flour. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So I'm roughly doing half. I'm not trying to go exactly half. So I'll do that there. That's my all-purpose flour. Here's my bread flour, and I'm just waiting for my scale to get to 450 grams. And once I'm there, I'm good to go. And I put it in my mixer for about 3 minutes. So on my Instagram, I'll show people all the time. I'm like, this is a 5-minute process. This is a like water, starter, flour, done. 5 minutes of my time, of my effort, of my energy. The rest of it is really just time on a clock. So once this is mixed, it's starting, then we start the first rise, okay? So the first rise is gonna go 6 to 8 hours. If you live in Canada, it's 9 hours. If you live in Arizona, it's roughly 6 hours. Why is that? It's just temperature, right? So if you think of like physics and biology, warmer temperature is going to get that bacteria going faster. Colder temperature is going to kind of make it go slower. Any other Canadians? I'm Canadian, by the way. Yeah, there never are. So this is going to go. So we've got the first rise, okay? Now, luckily, thanks to the power of television, this is what it looks like when we're done. After, yes, thank you very much. This is what you want your dough to look like, roughly, okay? Now, sometimes your dough is gonna be a little bit thicker, and sometimes your dough is gonna be a little bit runnier. And you're gonna be like, well, wait a minute, Charity, that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, that's it, you guys. Look how easy that is right there. Little secret, by the way, if you don't want your fingers to get sticky, you can always wet. I always have wet fingers when I'm working with my dough. Okay, this is a little bit lumpy. Can you guys see that? This is kind of what it looks like. It doesn't stick to the sides anymore. It's a little bit sticky. Here's one thing to remember. Artisan bread, like we're baking ours inside a Dutch oven. The Dutch oven is trapping the steam in there. If the dough is sticky, sticky comes from water. We want water. We like sticky because sticky transfers to steam, and steam transfers to a really beautiful bread. Does that make sense? So if you're used to different doughs, just remember, keep this one a little bit sticky, just a little bit, because we want some of that moisture in there. Okay, so this is step number 1. Now at home, I'll either put a lid or a plate on it, and I'm gonna leave it for 6 to 8 hours, except I'm not. I'm gonna do one little step in between there, one tiny, really important step. It's called the pull and turn. Gluten is sensitive. It's like, hey, leave me alone for a few minutes, then come back and check on me. Like, so we're gonna leave it alone for a few minutes, and then we're gonna come back. Now experts, which I'm not, true experts say you wanna do this pull and turn technique 4 times within the first hour. We've compromised, we've agreed, I'll do it twice. That's it. I'm gonna do it 2 times, that's good enough for me. So often when people say, hey Charity, I've got really flat bread. So, and who here has tried making sourdough before? So I know, okay. So I'm gonna give you 3 troubleshootings right off the bat. And if you want more, I have on my website a whole troubleshooter. My website's just charitylighten.com. So in troubleshooting, people say, my bread is super flat. What is my problem? First thing I'll say, how big is your Dutch oven? The Dutch oven matters. These stove pots, they just came out with these pots that I'll show you. They have made them big enough to fit the whole loaf, but tall so your bread bakes up. If your Dutch oven is too big, what's the bread gonna do? It's gonna bake out. It will taste delicious, trust me, it'll be amazing. But often people will send me a picture of their Dutch oven and it's like a 7-quart, 8-quart. You're like, okay, it's gonna take the shape, okay? That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is I say, well, did you do the pull and turn technique? This little silly technique actually adds to the oven spring. So it's something you wanna make sure you're doing. And then issue number 3, if people are like, my bread is just flat, I don't know what it is, I will say, well, how happy is your starter? If your starter's not happy, it's not gonna work. This is what makes your bread rise. So what I'll tell people, for some reason, we don't really know why, your starter sometimes just needs a refresh. And all I mean by a refresh is throw away most of it, leave just a little bit, feed it fresh flour, fresh water. The next day, leave it on your counter. The next day, throw away most of it, feed it fresh flour, fresh water. By day 3, it should be bubbly, it will grow, it will rise. If this doesn't rise once it's been fed, your bread's not gonna rise. So what I mean by that is I'll show you guys, I will feed this, and then in a few hours it should be at the top of my jar with bubbles. And it should smell nice instead of acidic. So those would be the troubleshooters, okay? So now I left my gluten, I left it alone for a few minutes. I'm gonna show you guys really quickly what the pull and turn is all about. So what's so interesting, those in the front row can see this a little bit better. This is a pretty lumpy dough. It looks pretty lumpy. After 2 pull and turns, it's nice and smooth. It's amazing. It's fascinating to me, all the things that this earth grows, that's been given to us, that feeds us. So I'm using my hands almost like a spatula. I'm just pushing my hand down the side, I'm pulling up, and I'm turning the bowl as I do it. That's just so I can kind of get all of that dough. Essentially, this is almost like a bit of a kneading process for the dough. It's just mixing around. Now it's getting a little bit smoother, not much, a little bit, but you guys will see after one more pull and turn, this one will be ready to go. How am I doing? I'm doing good, okay. I got so much more. I'm like gonna feed you guys with a fire hose, okay? So now we're gonna pretend that time on the clock has passed, we're good to go. Now we're ready to shape our dough. So normally what I tell people is master the white, this is the classic white loaf. Master this first, get the technique down, and then start adding things in. Like my favorite right now is jalapeno cheddar. I love a cinnamon burst. I love a cream cheese chive. Today we're gonna do, of course, chocolate. And I mean, if sourdough is good without chocolate, it can only be better with chocolate. Oh yes, thank you, thank you. You were 2 steps ahead of me. You're like, I see where she's going.
Yep.
Like, I know where she's going. It's not where we want her to go. So I'm just going to put some flour down. I personally, because I was making so much bread, I was washing my counter constantly. So now I have one of those, what do you call them?
Pastry board?
Yeah, a pastry cloth. So I just fold it up and put it in my, like I'm never cleaning my counter off anymore, which is so, so nice.
Just canvas, right?
Yeah, just a thick canvas, it works beautifully. So I'm gonna take this. Now normally, I wanna shape this into a nice ball. Now for those of you who have done cake, okay? Here's the interesting thing. You can put like a cake batter into a 9x13 pan and just like shake it around and throw it in the oven, and somehow it comes out like this beautiful looking cake. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Like you can spread the batter around, it just seems to like mix perfectly. The bread is not that way. However you shape this bread, that is exactly what your bread will look like when you pull it out of the oven. So normally I would tell people, try to tuck your hands. I'll show you just a little bit, but I'm gonna add some good things in here, so I'm not tucking it quite yet. But you just get a nice round ball. Then once you have your ball, you're gonna stick it into a Dutch oven. Will you grab my black Dutch oven?
I'll get it.
Okay, so you guys can see right now, I've got a bowl that I don't wash, and my bread rises in my Dutch oven. How much dishes do I have to do? Like it's so easy. So because I'm gonna add a few things in here, this is, and if you're seeing up front, this is fairly sticky. This is still a sticky dough, which I don't mind. I don't mind the stickiness of it because I know that that is gonna translate into some nice, good steam in my bread, okay? So you guys are gonna look at this and you're like, oh, that looks a little bit like I'm just making cinnamon rolls, because I kind of am. So for this particular class, I just did a little chocolate fudge. Simple, this is like I had some extra ice cream fudge. If you want a cheater recipe for ganache, just melt some chocolate chips with some heavy whipping cream. That's simple, okay? If you're like, oh, I wanna do that, I wanna make this. So I'm just gonna spread this, some of this fudge, like, again, you guys, I am like a lazy baker. So like, I just wanna get some of that on there. Did you guys all try this? You could see some of that fudge that was in there. This does not need to look pretty. I'm just kind of adding some flavor and color. And then I'm going to sprinkle this with chocolate chips. Now, this I will say about Geekies. There's a few things that I love at Geekies because they're really hard to find anywhere else. One is the mini chocolate chips. So full transparency, this morning I had chocolate on my brain because of this class, and I wanted to have a healthy breakfast, so I made some oatmeal, but then I sprinkled some mini chocolate chips on it. And the mini allow you to have just a little bit of chocolate without feeling like you're being too indulgent. And they're hard to find everywhere. They're actually fairly hard to find. So if you're here today, I highly recommend, this is my favorite. These are the mini semi-sweet Ghirardelli. I love these. So I'm just gonna take some chocolate chips and I'm gonna sprinkle it right in there. Now the hardest part, just so you guys know, when you're doing the add-ins, but remember, you're gonna master the white plastic loaf before you do the add-ins, right? The hardest part is just making sure it's incorporated throughout your whole bread. So I'm gonna do something just called the trifold. So you guys can see it's kind of a rectangle, not really. I'm just gonna take one half and slide it in, and the other half and slide it in, and now I have a blank canvas to add more goodness, okay? Just like that. So I can add the rest of my fudge in here, or ganache, whatever you have, any sort of melted chocolate goodness, and we're just gonna spread that around. You guys already, you're like, okay, this is easy, right? This is not hard stuff. And then I'm gonna spread the rest of my chocolate chips. The only thing you do wanna remember is you just wanna get the shape of the bread that you want. I have an oval Dutch oven, so sometimes I just roll this into an oval, but today we're going to, my hands are dirty. Will you just rip a piece of that parchment paper off? So I'm gonna roll this similar to just a cinnamon roll. You guys have made cinnamon rolls before. Oh, yeah, that's perfect, yeah. So I'm rolling it one way, and now I'm just rolling it the other way because I just wanna make sure my bread, every slice, has some of this goodness. Now I'm taking my hands, I'm just tucking. This is called just a tight gluten skin. So I'm just tucking the top of that because I want this to stay tight, and I'm kind of turning it a little bit like that. There's my loaf, just like that. And then my loaf is gonna go right into my Dutch oven, and this is gonna start the second rise, okay? So we mix the dough, we wait 6 to 8 hours. We shape the dough, we wait roughly 2 hours, and then we bake the dough. Does that make sense? So now that you guys know, you're like, okay, I got this down, we got every step covered. Okay, there's good times to make bread and there's bad times to make bread. Okay? Yes.
Can I just quickly bear my testimony about how you just
Please do.
So the first time you did, we have like cinnamon chips out there. So in our class, she does a cinnamon loaf.
That's another one that's hard to find anywhere else. If you guys want, the cinnamon's my favorite. Sorry.
This was not a plug.
Okay,
But
normally
the
I
first
just
time-
do cinnamon and sugar.
Yes.
Just like that. Cinnamon, sugar, and the cinnamon chips.
I
It's amazing.
couldn't remember how you put it in.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, I'm just gonna like fold it and get it shaped the way that I did. But then I was like, no, I want more cinnamon in it. So I rolled it and I was like, I'm just gonna put it everywhere so that everyone could get. And when you are putting your chocolate or cinnamon chips or whatever it is into this hot pan and it's on the outside, it will burn all of that sugar that is on the outside. So the way that she just put all of that and wrapped it with the dough to protect what's in there, that is so important.
Okay,
And so,
thank you.
like, I mean, I pulled it out and my husband's like, you're not gonna eat that, right?
Yeah.
We're just gonna, I think I even went to film it and I was like, no, we're just gonna film
Aw.
it. Because all of the sugar that is on the outside is just too hot for sugar. So the way
Yeah.
that she just showed you, that is really the only way to add those types of
Yeah,
things in there.
and then if in your oven you're finding like, oh my gosh, it's still burning a little bit, lower the temperature of your oven when you have sugar in it. Okay, yes.
Okay, I also had that problem. What do you do if you're too rough with it and the top skin breaks and then you're like, oh no, it's all
Okay.
out here?
Okay, so you can try to reshape it again. I'm glad you brought that up. There's one more reason people's bread falls, okay? And I forgot to mention that. You can let your dough rise for too long. So your first rise, people will message me and they're like, well, it won't even hold its shape. Like I poured on my counter, I can't even shape it. That tells me instantly your first rise went too long. So if that's the case, move it back 6 hours, or if you're like, I'm still having that problem, add a few extra tablespoons of flour when you're making the dough originally to just give it that kind of, that structure that it needs. So usually that, it should hold its shape. If not, the first rise has gone too long, or just try to reshape it again. Here's the downside. What happens is, when I say it's gone too long, like you guys picture in your mind how this looked before. It would all of a sudden have bubbles in it. Like it had risen and then it's starting to collapse. that means that the bacteria has started eating through that gluten. It's eating it up. It's like, hey, listen, there's none left. I ate it, there's none left to hold the structure of the bread. So you don't want it to go too long. Similarly, this right here will rise and it will look, this will rise and it will look like the bread that I brought into class. Like it will have a nice shape to it, doubled in size, it's ready to be scored. But if you happen to see all of a sudden a seam, it's almost like that skin has started to pull away from itself. That seam is telling you that the bacteria started eating through it, and it will slowly start to collapse when you bake it. The good news is it tastes delicious. You can use it, you can eat it, people will love it, but if you really are trying to get it to hold its shape, it won't hold it as well. Okay, so next thing I want to show you guys really quickly. Yeah, go ahead, will you wash this one?
Okay, can you cut your time in half by using a proofing oven?
Such a good question. So the answer is yes and no. For the loaf that's in the bread in there today, I wanted to get it ready to go, so I used a proofing oven. The bacteria does not like it. The best way to do it is to turn it on and then turn it off. The added heat will buy you maybe two hours.
Okay.
But anything more than that, it goes and it just starts to collapse. So, okay, so now when you're done, you're like, okay, good, I'm done. My bread is rising, I'm ready to go. I've got this starter. Now keep in mind, you guys, I told you that I normally do 2 loaves of bread. So I usually am down to this much starter left in my jar. So what you want to do when you've got your starter left is now it needs to be fed. And all that means is it needs fresh flour. Just think of it like it's been eating, it's hungry again. So you just take your fresh flour and you add it into your jar. And keep in mind, remember I normally just have this much starter in my jar. So the typical rule of thumb is however much starter you have, that's how much flour you would put in. So when I teach classes, everyone puts a 1/4 cup of starter into their jar, then they add a 1/4 cup of flour and roughly a 1/4 cup of water. This is the part that makes people crazy. When they come, I don't let them measure the water. I give them a measuring cup for the flour, but I tell them that they have to eyeball the water, and they're like, no, give me a measuring cup, tell me exactly how much. Here's why I don't give you guys a measurement. Because I want you to learn the consistency. So I'm just gonna add enough water. I want a thick pancake dough consistency. That's what I'm going for. Let me tell you what happens if it's runny. It's no issue if it's runny, but the runnier your starter is, the hungrier it gets. It just wants more flour. So you can have runny starter, it just means you probably need to feed it twice a day instead of once a day. So what I go for with the consistency is I want something that's thick. So do you guys see that this is a thicker pancake dough consistency? That's the best way I can say it. And if your starter's fairly runny, that would make your dough just a little bit runnier. If your starter's thick, it makes your dough just a little bit thicker. It's fine. It's just kind of getting used to like what your dough feels like. So I just fed this fresh flour and fresh water, right? Everyone saw that, not magic. Now I have the ultimate decision. Am I gonna bake tomorrow and leave it on the counter? Or I'm gonna say goodbye to it and put it in the refrigerator? Does that make sense? The refrigerator puts it into dormant stage. Now, I can keep this in my refrigerator indefinitely. I just need every once in a while, I need to be like, hey, how are you doing? Do you need some fresh food? Yes, I do. So throw away most of it. If it's been in the fridge for more than a week, throw away most of it. That's lactic acid, there's lots of bacteria in there, it's just gonna battle for any food that you give it. Throw away most of it, give it fresh flour, fresh water. Then you can put it right back in the fridge if you want to. So every week you wanna feed it, or 2. See what I did there? You could maybe go 2 weeks of neglect. Otherwise, pull it out, feed it. Yes.
Okay, so I did that for vacation.
Yes.
It kind of has a hard time coming back. Do you recommend like 2 or 3 feeds before you start?
So depending on how long it's in the fridge and how healthy it was. So how long were you on vacation?
Like a week.
Okay, so a week. Usually pull it out of the fridge, feed it fresh flour and water. The next day it should be good to go. If you're like, it's not looking so good, do it 1 more day. Usually you're good by that. Now sometimes people, like Heather, will leave it in their fridge until it starts to grow something called hooch. That's what it's called. It's
I said this before, I am hooch.
yes, like it starts to grow some things in there that you're like, I don't know that that is healthy for me. I tell people, you can't kill bacteria. COVID probably should have taught us something along those lines. You can't kill it. So just throw away most of it, feed it fresh flour, feed it fresh water, leave it on the counter. Repeat for a few days if you need to. Yeah.
Okay, so also, if you get a really strong ammonia smell, is that still okay?
Yeah, so the strong ammonia smell, it's kind of like a vinegar, that's lactic acid. That's a byproduct of what's going on in there. When it smells like that, it just needs fresh flour. That's all it's telling you. It's like, hey, listen, we got a lot of friends in here, we need some more food. So that's it. So you can leave it on the counter. Now, if you leave it on the counter, you got to use it the next day. You're like, I got to use it. And by that, I mean, you're taking out some of it and putting fresh flour and fresh water. So you have, now here's the question I usually get. Okay, so I just fed it. How long do I have to wait until I can use this? Roughly 6 hours. It will start to ferment, you'll get lots of big bubbles in there. So normally what I tell people, if you're like, I want to bake bread every Sunday, give me the schedule. I'm like, okay, I got you covered, okay? You're gonna bake bread Sunday morning. Saturday morning, pull your starter out of the fridge, throw away half, feed it. By Sunday morning, it's ready to go. That's the rule. Now you guys are not going home with starter today, so hopefully you've got good friends, or do you guys have dehydrated? Okay, they've got dehydrated starter here, go home with the starter, all that stuff. So those are the main things that you guys, how am I doing? Oh my gosh, okay.
You're fine.
Okay.
We started late.
We started late. So normally if we were here a little bit longer, what I would do is I would go over to the oven, check my bread. I like to bake it in the Dutch oven for almost the entire time. Then I pull the parchment paper and the bread and I finish it for like 3 minutes to get nice golden crust all the way around the outside. Depending on how crusty you want your bread to be, I've seen some really dark sourdough. Can I see the booklet real quick? I've seen some really, really dark sourdough breads. This is usually how I bake mine. It's a nice like golden. My kids don't like that crusty, and it's hard to cut if it gets too crusty. So I do a golden bake, but again, that's a matter of preference. This book is fantastic. It's got lots of tips in there. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Okay, so you make the two, and then like say you're not giving it away, you freeze it.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel like it gets condensation in there. I know that means I didn't cool it enough.
Exactly.
But like if it's soft, can you put it back in the oven to get the crust back?
Yeah, just put it back in the oven or a toaster oven or anything like that. But yes, you definitely want to cool it. Now you guys, I was testing you to see if anyone would remind me to do the pull and turn one more time. So this is, you guys can see it's still a little bit lumpy, and I'm just gonna get my hands wet. I'm just getting my hands wet because I don't want the dough to stick to my hand. Using it like a spatula, so I'm sticking it down the side, I'm pulling it up, and if you guys could see this in person, it's almost completely smooth now. Like, I'll show at least the front row can probably see this. So I'm just trying to go around all 4 sides, and you guys can see it's kind of gone from lumpy to smooth. Do you guys see that? Now I would leave this alone. I wouldn't even come near it. I'm like, okay, it's good to go. It's gonna rise for 6 hours. Then I'm gonna shape it, then I'm gonna bake it. Okay, yes.
Going back to square one on the starter.
Yes.
If you wanted to make it today,
Yep.
you go home and it would only take 6 hours and then you could use it.
No, okay, if you're gonna make it from scratch,
Right.
flour and water, you need like 10 days. Yeah, in the winter time, probably 2 weeks.
On your counter.
So you take it, you feed it fresh flour and water, throw away some the next day. Day in, day out, day in, day out.
But if you buy the dehydrated one, you don't have to.
Yes. Dehydrated one, you can add water to it. It will take a day or 2 to kind of come back to life. Okay, here and then here.
When you double it,
Yes.
do you just, like, do you weigh it? Do you eyeball it when you separate it? Because you'd separate it and then either do your, like, shaping.
Yep, such a good question. Here's what I do. This is my dough. I've got, let's pretend I just mixed it. I would get my scale. I would put, this is my second bowl. It goes on top of my scale, stick my hands in that are wet, and I take out 900 grams of dough. And then I do the pull and turn on both of them, leave them, come back, do the pull and turn, cover them both, done. And then I shape them both and I bake them both.
gotcha.
That
So
was your
you
next
pulled
one.
out.
I pull out 900 grams.
Okay.
Yeah,
So each loaf is 900 grams?
Yeah.
Okay.
yep. Such good questions. Okay, here and then here.
Okay, so if you're doubling, how much do you know to put in for the starter?
Okay, so this is rule of thumb. Roughly, you want 3/4 of a cup of starter per loaf. Roughly. Because I've done this enough, I know that this, can you see where my line is right here of starter? That will rise to the very top. This is enough for 2 loaves. Every time. And I'll have this much left over. Other thing I want you guys to remember, you always want to save at least 2 tablespoons. Like, don't get to the point where you're like, I'm scraping out my jar, and all of a sudden like, oh no, I used up all my starter. And because I was so afraid I would do that, I dehydrated my own starter. So I have some starter in like my food storage that's like, just in case I need you, I have dehydrated starter. Okay, here.
Are you using all-purpose flour and bread flour for the starter when you
Such a good
redo it
question.
again?
I use all-purpose flour because it's the cheapest.
Okay.
I had one lady message me and she was like, oh my gosh, my starter is so finicky and I'm using commit flour. Commit flour is very expensive. So even when I make whole wheat flour, commit flour, whatever flour, I'm always using an all-purpose
Okay.
starter.
Thank you.
Yep, and then I'm just adding in the other flours, yes.
So if on my first rise, if I go beyond and it's bubbled up too much and it's not, is there a way to save it, or you just?
Do you have a deep fryer?
No.
You could make scones, you could do flatbread, you could do pizzas. It's hard to get it to take its shape again after that. So find other ways. You could still bake it like a focaccia bread, but it just won't hold its shape very well. Good questions. Yes, here, back there, and then there.
So when you said to double this, why wouldn't you just put 300 grams of starter in?
I do. When I double it, that's what I do. I do 300 grams of starter, I do 20 grams of salt, I do 600 grams of water, 900 grams of flour. Yes.
So if you're not ready at 6, how do you know if it's ready at 6 or 8?
Okay, so it's more just, you just get, it's a look. When you're like, okay, well my starter was like down here. Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job with this camera. Down here, and now it's here. If you've experienced enough, you'll like, oh, I know it will rise just a little bit further. But I now tell people, err on making your first rise too slow versus too long. It will give you a better structure when you're shaping it. And then you can keep an eye on your second rise. You can keep an eye on your second rise and be like, okay, I think it's doubled in size. Keep an eye on this one. Same thing who asked me about proofing. You could proof it in this one too, but be really careful. It tends to just overproof.
So
Okay.
most of the time you're just doing double size, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, most of the time you're just looking for double size. Oh, can we stay for one more hour? Just kidding, there's another class
Always
coming.
are waiting.
Yes, there's another class coming. I will take 2 more questions. Although I wish we could hang out forever.
You can chat after too.
Yes, you guys can ask me questions. And truthfully, like anything that you guys would need to know, okay, I just need to tell you right off the bat. If for those of you that are like, Charity, just tell me what I need. You need a scale. You need a scale. You need at least one of these. I have 4 of these. They're $1.25, I think, $1.50. I think they're $1.50, and this right here is like the best gift to give people. And then if you're like, okay, I'm ready to make an investment, the stove pot that they have, segue into.
Well, that's one of the things we're going to be giving away.
Yes, she's giving away this pot.
So the pot that's in the oven right now is what Charity was telling you about. So we originally loved the 4-quart for the diameter, but this year they came out with this 5-quart tall, and we were shocked and amazed at how much taller our bread loaves were getting.
Sorry, Heather.
No,
I need
you're
over
fine.
the camera because it's just every time I bake in this pot, I'm like, I need this.
But
Okay.
it brings height to it as well.
Can you guys see that? Isn't that so pretty? And to be honest, my scoring was trash on this one. And it still looks beautiful. This needs to go back into the oven for 5 more minutes, so I'm gonna pull it out while Heather talks.
So normally this pan is $3.50, and we beg it and plead with Stove every October because we love to melt our caramel in it, but we really do way more sourdough in it for the rest of the year. And so we have it on sale right now for $1.49, and it's one of those heritage style pans that you will use forever and ever. And so we have a bunch of those today that if you would like to get one, that on sale for $150. Which if you don't have one, I like the way that they have designed their lids to match their pots. They just fit so nicely. The height. You will thank us after you bake your first loaf. But let's give away some guides and then a pot. How about that?
Yes.
So I grabbed 3 of our sourdough guides and then Charity's favorite little spatula too. I was texting Whitney while she was teaching and like, hey, add the pastry cloth. Hey, add these things to the table. So we do have the salt. So we do have a table when you go back into the store of all the things that Charity talked about today. So you don't have to go rummaging through the store.